Hello and welcome to ChIPs LinkedIn Live. I'm so glad to be here today with Ronelle Geldenhuys. We started this as a way to showcase some of the amazing work from the ChIPs community to advance women in tech, law, and policy. And we have an exciting episode for you today. Ronelle is a founding member and the co-chair of the Australia and New Zealand chapter of the ChIPs Australia New Zealand chapter, and she's based in Brisbane in the sunny Australian state of Queensland. She's a patent attorney in electronics and software and a principal at the boutique firm Foundry Intellectual Property. So normally we do these at 9 a.m. Pacific, and to recognize our fabulous community globally, I'm so glad to be able to be doing this, bringing it to you at a new time with Ronelle. So welcome, Ronelle.
Thanks, Monica. It is such a privilege to be here this morning and talk to you.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here and to really recognize the global scope of the ChIPs membership and the Chipsterhood. I have had so many great conversations with you, and I want to bring those out for all of our guests who are listening to this episode. You talk about the importance of mentoring and sponsoring. Why don't we dive right in and just tell us a little bit more, as many stories as you'd like to share about what that's meant for you and how it really helps people in their career advancement through access, allies, advancement, all of that.
Yes, absolutely. I think mentoring can be a bit fraught. So I remember being a junior and having to do a mentoring program, and there was a lot of stress. There was a lot of tension. Like I had to find a mentor, and we had to have these weekly meetings, and it was very stressful. And I think it's important to realize that mentoring doesn't need to be that. It can be much simpler. Find someone who's an example to you and that you can learn from, and just be mindful of good examples and decide what the take-home messages are that you want to use for yourself. And I think that's in terms of approaching mentoring, I think that's a useful attitude to have. And then in terms of sponsorship, I think that's another really important topic. And what I mean when I talk about sponsorship is really being there to support other women and advance other women. So, you know, if you have an opportunity to give a job to 5 different people, choose the woman. You know, if they're qualified for the job, and if they put their hand up for it, just do that, something a little bit extra to support the women, because we know that we all, you know, it's a little bit harder. Yes, we have theoretically equal opportunities, but I think all women will know it's not exactly equal. It's a little bit harder. There are daily microaggressions that we need to deal with. There are things that are just a little bit tougher. So if you can give an opportunity to a woman, just go ahead and do it.
I love that you said that, and it's so true. We need the opportunity. We need that chance. Everyone gets a break. And when I think of mentoring and sponsoring in that context, I think a lot of times I meet women looking for a mentor, looking for a sponsor. And I also meet a lot of women who want to offer mentoring and sponsoring. How do we connect that? How do we invite women at the highest levels of leadership in to mentor and sponsor other women who maybe aren't already in their network? Because like we were talking about right before we started, so often it's the people who are not in the room with you who need the mentoring and sponsoring.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a challenge. We spoke about it in our chapter. We spoke about how it can be challenging. So ChIPs specifically, a lot of us are lawyers or attorneys in private practice, and so fundamentally we're competitors. So no one feels 100% comfortable with having one of your juniors being mentored by someone in a different firm. Like, it just, you know, people have concerns, and how do you do this, and how do you set up this a mentoring program in this type of environment? So one of the solutions that the UK ChIPs chapter actually trialed, which I think is something that we might look at in Australia as well, is instead of having these formal programs, and instead of having a particular mentor that guides you through a year or two of your life, looking at smaller snippets. So what the UK chapter did was sort of like speed dating, where they had the ChIPs chapter found a dozen senior people who were willing to be involved, and the people who wanted mentoring would arrive at the event, and you'd have a couple of minutes, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, to chat to a handful of different people and ask them questions and ask them advice. And it's very informal, and it's I think less pressure and less intensity, but still an opportunity to build relationships and to gain value from short conversations and just touching on topics instead of making it a big deal, which I think opportunities definitely lie there, which is something that we're going to look at in Australia and New Zealand.
Tell us about experiences you have had through mentoring and sponsoring that have helped you in your career.
Well, the journey's a little bit fraught, and I think there are very few people who have a clean story of being in a job and being assigned a mentor and everything worked really well. So one of the jobs I had, lawyers and attorneys do timekeeping, right? And so one of the jobs I had just started, and in the training program, they were showing us the software to do the timekeeping. And they used a real life example of one of the partners, a woman who had billed 23 hours on that particular day. That was the timesheet they showed us to show us how to clock your time and what to write. They showed us that she had clocked 23 hours. And I don't know if it was supposed to be inspirational or whether this was the example that they showed us. But in any case, obviously, it caused a lot of conversation amongst those of us who had just joined the job.
Wow.
And shortly after joining that firm, they had sort of like a diversity group, a supporting women group. So they had a lunch, and they had these two inspirational speakers. So one of them was this partner who had billed 23 hours on that particular day. And I remember thinking that she billed her clients for going to the toilet. That was sort of something that stuck with me. But anyway, and so she spoke about her job, and she told this anecdote about how she was taking client calls as she was in labor in the hospital. And at one point she mentioned that she kind of regretted family holidays that she cancelled. And then she backtracked when someone asked the question and said, was there anything that you would have done differently? She backtracked and she said, no, actually, there was nothing that she regretted. That was the first speaker. The second speaker was a woman who, she was a sportsman. She'd gone to the Olympics or the World Championships in something. I forget, it was some other water sports. I forget whether it was surfing or windsurfing or something. And she'd been a student at the time, and she'd asked her father if she could take a year off university, a year of studying law, and pursue. She was going to like the World Championships, right? She needed to train, and her father said no. And so she did everything at the same time. And so her inspiring story was how to do everything at the same time and just push yourself and push yourself. And I remember walking out of there thinking, oh my goodness, those are the two examples. So do you know which one of those two I chose to be my mentor? Neither of them.
Neither, I hope.
I quit my job at that firm and I walked
my heart
away.
Good. My heart just sank with those stories.
Yes, exactly. And so in the end, the mentor that had the biggest impact on me was someone whose primary characteristic was kindness. So when I worked for this particular attorney, I remember we were in a group, and one of my colleagues was going through some tough times at home, and he was really not dependable, and he wouldn't pitch up for meetings, and his reminders were late, and his secretary was so frustrated because she was dealing with all these clients and missed deadlines. And I was really intolerant of this, and I was very upset, and I thought, we need to change our flexible working hours policy. And I really went in there and I went digging, and I was like, we can't deal with this. And the partner was so tolerant, and he was so supportive of this colleague of mine. And, he came out the other side, and it was one tough year in his life, and things went well afterwards. And what do you know, a year later, I went through my own very difficult situation with family drama, and there were days that I couldn't work, and there were days when I wasn't working properly. And so in terms of mentoring, really, that partner had the biggest impact on me in terms of learning how to be kind and how to be empathetic and how to support your colleagues through the things they go through. So I think in terms of, my own journey, my big take-home lesson was try and find someone who demonstrates the things, the characteristics and the behavior that you value. And I think that the relationship is extremely important. Find someone that you can connect with, find someone that you can understand, and someone with shared values, because ultimately I think those values are the foundation of what you make your career decisions on, what you base your career decisions on. So from my experience, I would say step one is find someone that you respect and that can help you to make choices that are based on a shared value system.
That's a really powerful story, Ronelle, and I'm so glad that you found someone who had these values that you wanted to see for yourself to be part of that environment, because it is not always easy. And I think the work I do in bringing in wellness and learning and leadership skills into industries, legal, tech, policy industries, where women are challenged by a lot of microaggressions and perspectives and beliefs. And so to find people who are stepping up, stepping forward, lifting you up, spend so much time at work, you've got to thrive. Because if you're not thriving, then what's it all for, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things that I think is also quite interesting, we spend a lot of time talking about the working environment. So you want to be in a working environment where you're supported by your colleagues and where you're supported by your supervisors, and that has a giant impact on how you experienced your day-to-day life. But I think the other issue to talk about is just sort of society at large, and I think that's another important lesson that I've learned from a mentor quite recently is I experience support at work, but our clients can often be very challenging to deal with. And I think there are a lot of women who have stories similar to mine, where you walk into a meeting room and with one or two male colleagues, and the client ignores you completely and talks to your male colleagues who don't have the technical expertise or who are not going to be the attorney on the matter. And it can be very, very difficult to work with. My own experience is that that's harder. Dealing with clients who dismiss you, I find harder than dealing with colleagues who still need to sort of figure out what their relationship is with you. And so one of the things that I learned from a mentor as well is the importance of actually just disengaging from those clients. And I actually had a really difficult client last year who would set up meetings and ask me to do work, and would just didn't want to pay for anything and didn't want to treat me with respect. And it was sort of getting the permission. Someone more senior, more experienced said to me, Ronelle, you don't need that, get rid of it. And I disengaged from the client, and it was just this huge weight off my shoulders. And I think, the more you can rid your working environment from negative energies and the things that you don't need, the better.
That's really great advice. And I think it's hard, but it's true that we can't always change people and their behavior and attitudes and beliefs, but we can decide who we want to spend time with. And as a lawyer, that's always challenging. If you're in a practice and you have clients, you want to keep all your clients. But I think it's very, very powerful advice to not keep clients who are not respectful of who you are. You shared a story with me when we first met about a friend who introduced you to loss. You went from one very difficult industry to another in terms of being a woman in engineering and in law. You had a PhD at the time, and a friend suggested IP. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. So I was in academia, and it's pretty tough. You know, every time you finish a research project, you have to apply for funding for the next project. And I kind of reached a crossroads where I either had to move to a different country or choose to do something different. And I was trying to find a job, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And it was really difficult to move. And a friend of mine, who we had known each other for years and years, we'd been to high school together, we had studied engineering together, and she was a patent attorney. And one day I was complaining to her about trying to find a job, and she said, "Ronelle, I know you would enjoy patents, so just give it a try." And it was such great advice, because I haven't looked back. I applied for a couple of jobs, and the first one I walked into was a really, really good fit. It was a good firm, with good mentors, and I just loved it from the get-go.
And that's also how you met your ChIPs co-founder, right?
That's true. So the firm I worked at was Freehills, and Anna works there as well. And in fact, the whole group is quite strong in women. So I think I found that unusual coming from engineering that was extremely male dominant. It was very interesting going into Freehills, where I don't know officially what the numbers are, but probably half of the lawyers are women, and many of the partners are women. And one of the things that I noticed was that, and this was 15 years ago, so the world has changed a lot in the past 15 years. I think we forget how quickly things change, but at the time, one of the female partners was working part-time, which was really unusual at the time, to have a partner who was working in IP in this top-tier law firm, and who was working part-time. And just the whole environment was extremely supportive of flexibility and unique personalities. I think you didn't have to fit the mold. You could be who you needed to be. And I think starting a career in that kind of supportive environment, where you feel that you fit, and where you feel like you have opportunities to be you, has made a huge difference to me. I think in terms of sticking with it. You often see the thing with patent attorneys, I think, is you come from being an engineer or scientist. So law is no one's first choice. It ends up being people's second choice. So you often see patent attorneys who sort of start off and then go back. And they go back to science or to research or whatever. And I think for me personally, having started in a very supportive environment is definitely one of the factors that's kept me at it.
It's an incredible story, and what an incredible experience that you had. We were talking about how often we forget some of those advantages that we've had, or the work that we had to do to get to where we are now. What are some of the things that you have benefited from that you don't want to forget, so that we can continue to keep making an impact, doing more?
Yeah, look, I think we spoke about this before, how there are lots of opportunities that we have in 2022 as women in the workforce that are easy to take for granted. I think it's really important to remember, in the middle of the previous century, if you were a working woman and you got married, there was an expectation that you would quit your job. And certainly once you had children, there was an expectation that you would quit your job and stay at home. And I think we forget how in a relatively short period of time, things have changed a lot, and things have changed not easily. People had to fight for these rights. People had to make real sacrifices to their own careers and opportunities to speak up and make sure that things change. And I think it's very important for women to be mindful in their working environment what the things are that we take for granted that weren't there before, and to value them and to use them. For example, if you have the opportunity to work flexibly, or you have the opportunity to take maternity leave, or whatever the policies are that are available in your firm, I think it's important to value them and to use them. Take the maternity leave, take the time and spend it with your children, especially while they're little and they need you. The job's not going anywhere. But I think more than that, it's really important for us to realize that everything that we have needs to be fought for. No one's going to give you anything. No one's going to change a firm policy. I mean, maybe you're lucky. Maybe you have, a strong HR department and you have someone there who's fighting for people's rights. But generally, that's not the case. So I think it's important to look around you where you're working and try and figure out what can be better, and not just sit back and wait for it to happen, but stand up and talk about it. And I know from my own personal experience that women don't like doing that. We're not measured on the social change that we encourage in the organizations that we work for. We're rewarded for sitting down and billing extra hours. So instead of getting up and going to talk to HR, going to talk to a partner, or writing a memo and emailing it around to people who don't want to be bothered, it's much easier to sit down and just do your work and bill and go home at the end of the day. But we can't do that, though. I think it's really important to realize we can't do that. We have to sometimes stick our necks out, especially, if it's not for yourself, if you feel okay for yourself, your environment, you have what you need, but you notice that someone else doesn't, maybe you can, from your position of privilege, being if you're a more senior person, or if you are someone who has the ear of someone with influence, maybe you do need to stand up and speak up for someone who needs a couple of extra days off, who needs extra support, who is not being seen, whatever the case may be. I think we all work in environments that are not perfect, and we can all find something, it doesn't matter how big or how small it is, something that we can champion. And I think that's very important for women look, I think we are in a position of privilege. We like to complain about women's rights and all the hard yards we've done or whatever. But the reality is we all have degrees. We all have jobs. We all, many of us live in first world countries with everything that provides us. But there are people who could benefit from changes in their working environments, despite all the progress that has already been done. So I think in terms of the most important thing that we can all do is be mindful where there can be change, and put your hand up if you can do something to champion that change, or to support that change, or to help it.
I love that you said mindfulness. That's very important to me. As you know, we have the ChIPs Global Summit and ChIPs Next Gen and ChIPs Global Summit and ChIPs General Counsel Bootcamp all happening next week in San Francisco. I'm so excited for this whole week of engagement with women from all over the world coming together. We'll have 800 people coming together, 72 speakers, 3 days. It's going to be incredible. And then everyone's going to go back to their companies, back to their jobs, back to their cities. If you could share one thing with everyone who's coming in to Global Summit so that they can go back and do one thing that actually, the thing that makes an impact, right? Not another panel where we talk about it, but the thing that we actually do because we had this privilege of coming together and deciding to do something.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. It's so easy to, go to the summit and make all these connections and have a great time while you're there, and then you go back and then it's life as normal. I think the biggest impact that anyone can have is often lies in those personal relationships. Someone you know, someone that you can connect with on a personal level. And so from that, I think an almost an easy thing that you can do is to see where you can impact a particular person's life. So I was recently at a conference in Australia. I was talking to a barrister, an IP barrister, who said that she didn't understand why it was that even even the female patent attorneys, even the female lawyers didn't brief out to the female barristers. They would just, choose the safe one, choose the same safe male barrister to do all the work. Where it would be a small thing, going through your contacts list and deciding who you're going to give that job to. It's a small thing when you have to decide between John and Jane to just pick up the phone and phone Jane and say, look, can you do the job for me? So I think in terms of just a little shift that ends up becoming a big shift is give the job to a woman, I think. And if you need to refer someone, refer a case or refer a person to a woman. And just in that way, I think we can start a stronger movement where we have women supporting women, and women encouraging women, and women sponsoring women. It has to start from within us, within our community, where we support one another. And it's an easy thing to do because women are just as good at men in what we do. We're all professionals, and we can all do the job. So just give the job to a woman.
It really is that easy, and especially here in the ChIPs community, there are 5,000 members, women who are, some of the brightest women I've met, and just an incredible group. So is there something that in our last 2 minutes that you'd like to share that you've seen in the Australia and New Zealand chapter that you were just really proud of or excited for?
Yes, absolutely. So we're such a young chapter and things are very new, but we've absolutely had so many people interested straight away. So many people put their hand up. No one quite knows what this community is or what it's going to provide, but everyone is super keen to get involved. And I think the part that I'm excited about is that we're hoping to move on. We're hoping to progress from panel discussions and drinks and lunches. It's great to get together. It's great to network. We do have to build our networks. But I think the next step is what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with the momentum and the people? We have all these people who want to put something into our community. What are we going to do with it? And I think what I'm very excited about is that we're now starting chapter 2. And chapter 2 is that we're trying to put together a bit of an agenda, a list of things that we want to have an impact in, whether it's, a mentoring program that we're starting with, but also other things where we can maybe make a real change in how things happen in the courts and how things happen in firms, and how, we're putting together a list and getting input from our members where they think change can happen, and putting together focus groups who can actually come up with a plan, an action plan of how to make real change that will affect the day-to-day lives of women in the profession.
I love what you shared, Ronelle, and I feel real power in creating accountability around this action of just hiring women. It's so easy, and it's something that we can continue to make even easier with the expansion of ChIPs. So thanks so much, Ronelle Geldenhuys from Foundry Intellectual Property, the founder and co-chair of the Australia New Zealand chapter of ChIPs. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on LinkedIn Live.
Thank you, Monica. It's been an honor. Thanks so much.